I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, mighty king, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, king of the four quarters. Marduk, the great lord, established as his fate for me a magnanimous heart of one who loves Babylon, and I daily attended to his worship. This is perhaps one of the most famous excerpts from the legendary Cyrus Cylinder, a 500-year-old barrel-shaped clay artifact discovered during an archaeological excavation in Babylon in 1879. This famous text exalts the greatest of the Achaemenid Persian monarchs, Cyrus the Great, in the name of the local Babylonian god Marduk. Often seen as an early symbol of religious tolerance and an early expression of the concept of human rights, the cylinder has a fascinating history and an even more intriguing reception in the modern world. The truth is, as always, far more complicated than we may initially think. So the question arises, what is the Cyrus Cylinder really about? And what does it tell us about the Achaemenid Persian Empire and its rule in Mesopotamia? What traditions did it draw from? And what sort of religious and administrative policy does it reflect? Welcome to our video on the history and politics of the Cyrus Cylinder, one of the most important inscriptions in world history. Why is the cylinder so famous? The Cyrus Cylinder is an inscription in cuneiform, the script of the Babylonian language, dating to the 6th century BCE. Its form and style, as we will see later, are very standard for inscriptions from Mesopotamia during this period. So, why has it become so famous? The answers lie in the discovery of the cylinder itself. Back in spring 1879, an Assyrian Christian archaeologist named Hormuzd Rassam was conducting an archaeological dig in Babylon, sponsored by the British Museum, when he discovered an ancient, barrel-shaped inscription. This cylinder was sent to the British Museum, where it was realized that it had been commissioned by the Shahanshah himself, King Cyrus the Great of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The cuneiform script was incomplete in the first years after its discovery. The Yale University Museum acquired some pieces that completed the text and were later reunited with the rest of the inscription. The cylinder remains at the British Museum and continues to be studied by scholars from various disciplines. The fame of the cylinder exploded in the 20th century as it became a major topic of political and cultural conversations. The artifact was displayed at the British Museum, though it was also loaned to a few other places. The most important loaned location was Iran, where it went twice, once in October 1971 under Shah Reza Pahlavi and again in the autumn of 2010 under the Islamic Republic. The first case occurred under the auspices of the celebration of the 500 years since the foundation of the Achaemenid Empire, and the Shah made much fanfare of the cylinder's importance as a human rights document. This narrative was echoed by the president of the Islamist regime, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, in 2010. The cylinder's symbology and value, as an ancient expression of human rights, is perhaps the biggest reason for its fame, alongside its commissioning by the most seminal emperor in Iranian history. Cyrus the Great was a Persian king who ruled over a vast, multicultural empire and is widely lauded for his tolerance toward his conquered subjects' native religions and customs. This narrative partially stems from the Hebrew Bible's portrayal of Cyrus as a Messiah, allegedly allowing the Jews to return to their homeland after their exile in Babylon and sponsoring the reconstruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. These events are connected to the Cyrus Cylinder, and we will return to it later. As these stories we have just shared demonstrate, the Cyrus Cylinder is a document whose authorship and political proclamations have shaped the modern world's imagination and debates about human rights. However, as always, these narratives obscure the more complex nuances this priceless artifact introduces to our understanding of Persian history, making the cylinder's background infinitely more interesting. The cylinder's content. The Cyrus cylinder was commissioned by the Achaemenid Empire's most famous ruler, Cyrus the Great, after his conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE. The last ruler of Babylon to face the might of Iran's armies was Nabonidus, who appears to have been a usurper. A fact that will become important down the line, as it may explain some of the content of Cyrus's cylinder. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the Persians had launched a massive invasion force of up to 70,000 troops. They had already smashed the Babylonian Empire's armies in the Battle of Opis. As the Achaemenids were on their march, Nabonidus appears to have collected the statues of the gods of other Babylonian cities and brought them to Babylon. He did this because, for the ancient peoples of modern-day Iraq, the statues of each city's patron deity were essentially incarnations of the deity itself, and Nabonidus needed all the supernatural power he could find. After a long siege, the city fell, and Nabonidus disappeared from history. Some sources claim he was killed by Cyrus's commander Gobryas, while others claim that he was simply sent to be a regional governor. Whatever the case, Babylon was now under Persian control, ending millennia of Mesopotamian independence and imperial rule across Western Asia. The Cyrus cylinder speaks extremely harshly of Nabonidus, referring to him as someone who continuously did evil against Marduk's city, meaning Babylon. The authors of the cylinder claim that the god Marduk, patron of magic, wisdom, and water, was angry at the kidnapping of the idols of other gods and their being brought to the city. Consequently, Marduk is said to have personally asked Cyrus to come and liberate his city from the supposedly evil Nabonidus. Then, after briefly describing the city's conquest, the cylinder shifts to the first person. Cyrus exalts his own position as a faithful servant of Marduk, and speaks of himself as doing the proper rites to honor the god of the city. Cyrus also claims to have freed many Babylonians from conscripted labor, and to have returned all the idols of the gods to their sacred temples out of piety and respect. Throughout the text, Cyrus makes it clear that he is a ruler who is above all other kings, and that his domain is truly universal. He also explicitly appeals to local sensibilities, showing his supposed magnanimity in treating local gods according to local religious customs. All in all, the text is a masterstroke of political propaganda, combining the sentiment of victory the Persians wished to impose on the Babylonians with efforts to opt and appease them to solidify their newfound conquest. This balancing act results from both political innovations unique to Persia and old Babylonian practices, which we will investigate now. The Near Eastern background of the cylinder. The first aspect of the cylinder is its continuity with old Babylonian traditions. Texts exalting kings are common in many ancient Mesopotamian empires, dating back to the era of the first Babylonian dynasty. For instance, similar texts are found in old stelae ascribed to King Hammurabi, who reigned in the 1770s-1750s BCE, over a millennium before Cyrus's time. This observation suggests two things. One is that Cyrus was aware of this ancient tradition and sought to emulate it to gain the prestige that such proclamations would evoke amongst the Babylonians. The second is that scribes from Babylon had long been producing propaganda inscriptions for whomever their current political master was. These two patterns have led many scholars to conclude that the cylinder was composed by local Babylonian scribes and was likely used for a local consecration ceremony in which the text was buried under a building. One theory is that Cyrus's conquest of Babylon was supported by a faction of the Marduk priesthood that opposed Nabonidus for elevating the moon god Sin above their god. A clue to this lies in the proclamation on the cylinder itself, which claims that Cyrus entered Babylon peacefully. There are no independent sources to confirm this, so there is still no consensus on whether local collaborators helped Cyrus to win. What is certain is that Cyrus definitely tried to appeal to Marduk's priesthood and possibly granted them land tenure in return for wealth. Another element of the cylinder that is very much Mesopotamian is the role of the deity idols. As we mentioned previously, deities in the ancient lands of Sumer and its surroundings were considered alive and an important part of the religious life of a city. The very soul of a city lay in its patron deity, who was supposed to protect it and exalt the king who ruled it. Nabonidus may indeed have taken the idols of other cities to protect them from Cyrus, but the cylinder claims the last Babylonian king was actually kidnapping the spiritual hearts of other cities and causing much harm in the process. Cyrus returning the idols to their cities is framed as a gracious form of salvation, and many commentators have said that it shows Cyrus as a uniquely tolerant ruler. However, this is not quite the case. Previous Mesopotamian monarchs had performed similar acts of kidnapping idols, as Nabonidus did, and of returning and sponsoring the cults of other cities, as Cyrus did. By acting in this way, Cyrus is not being uniquely tolerant or magnanimous, but in fact playing the same political game that had been played for millennia in ancient Mesopotamia. Cyrus was showing himself to be a sponsor and protector of local cults, thereby appealing to local elites and their subjects to maintain his rule. The Shahanshah's policy, while indeed a political masterstroke, is one that had many predecessors in the land of the two rivers. The political and social background of the cylinder. We will now move on to the social background of the Cyrus cylinder, namely, what the cylinder's text tells us about Achaemenid religious policy. This topic is deeply interesting because of the long-standing view of the Achaemenids as uniquely tolerant and lenient in their management of local affairs. This view has been challenged by scholars like Amelie-Court, who mentions that the Achaemenids did interfere in local politics by installing their favored officials from a region to rule alongside Persian officials. Evidence of this is potentially seen in the text of the cylinder itself, as it mentions the release of many Babylonians from corvée labor. Some scholars have suggested that this may suggest a form of land redistribution occurred in the city of Babylon. It appears that the Persian local officials installed in the region managed the land previously owned by the king and gave it to local temple elites to increase their economic power. It also appears that many priests were previously supposed to do corvée labor for the king on royal land. In an attempt to gain the favor of these ill-treated priests, Cyrus simply granted them immunity from conscription in the future. In doing this, the King of Kings was changing the political economy of Babylon. He used previously royal land and distributed parts of it to local elites to make them loyal to the new regime. This Persian innovation in terms of opting officials from conquered lands occurred in various ways throughout the empire. There is another aspect of Achaemenid politics that is loud in its absence in the Cyrus cylinder: the personal religion of Cyrus himself. It is reasonable to assume that Cyrus the Great, like all Achaemenid rulers before and after him, was personally a follower of a form of Zoroastrianism. This is the original pre-Islamic religion of Iran, focused around the eternal battle between the good god, Ahura Mazda, and the evil god, Angra Mainyu. We are not sure whether the Zoroastrianism that survives today is the same as the one that Cyrus may have worshipped. But what is certain is that he did not try to impose the religion upon the Babylonians. This was not unique to the Achaemenids. In fact, scholars have shown that earlier Mesopotamian dynasties, such as the Assyrians, also, to some extent, practiced restraint in compelling others to believe in their gods. However, The Assyrians, who reigned before the Neo-Babylonians in the 9th century BCE, did have the idea that their patron god, Ashur, was above all others. What is unique in the Achaemenid case is that Cyrus fully embraced the local cults. The Cylinder makes no mention of Ahura Mazda, but says that Cyrus restored and rebuilt the temples of the local gods. The evocation of divine justice through Marduk shows that Cyrus was willing to use local cults and, indeed, to sponsor local infrastructure in good, faith projects to integrate a new province into his empire. The faith of Ahura Mazda was a matter solely for the Iranian court, not for the subjects of each province, a pragmatic move that enabled the Achaemenid strength. The impact of the Cyrus Cylinder and Persia on Judaism. There is one last and unexpected aspect of the Cyrus Cylinder that we will discuss today, its aforementioned connection to Judaism. This unexpected discussion occurs because the fall of Babylon coincides with the end of the Babylonian exile to which the Jewish elite had been subjected when the kingdom of Judah was conquered by the Babylonians in 597 BCE. Jewish sources, like the Book of Ezra, call Cyrus a Messiah for ordering the return of the Jews to Palestine and for issuing the reconstruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, which the Neo-Babylonians had destroyed. Biblical scholars have been intrigued by the Cyrus Cylinder due to the following passage in its text. I returned the images of the gods, who had resided there in Babylon, to their places, and I let them dwell in eternal abodes. I gathered all their inhabitants and returned to them their dwellings. This section might suggest that the Jewish elite were among the people allowed to return to their places of origin. However, the truth appears to be far more complicated. We have no evidence outside of biblical sources that Cyrus explicitly said that the Jews could return to their homes. In fact, it appears he lifted the deportation bans the Babylonians had issued. Moreover, there are no independent sources that confirm that Cyrus sponsored the reconstruction of the Jewish temple. Knowing this, what explains the favorable view of Cyrus in the Hebrew Bible? The answer may lie in the policies that the Cylinder espouses. The reconstruction of temples in Babylon and the imposition of friendly local elites were part and parcel of Achaemenid religious policies. Thus, the authors of books like the Book of Ezra and of other Hebrew texts like the Book of Chronicles, all of which exalt Cyrus, likely come from these elite circles. The benefits they derived from collaborating with the Persians is the most probable reason for exalting the King of Kings. Thus, rather than a sign of Achaemenid tolerance or deference towards Judaism, the answer to the connection between the Cyrus Cylinder and the Hebrew Bible is more mundane and political. The success of Persian religious pragmatism, evident in the Cyrus Cylinder itself, impacted the Hebrew Bible and its authors, shaping both Jewish and Persian history in extremely profound ways. Conclusion. As we have observed, the Cyrus Cylinder is a far more complicated document than our standard narratives would have us believe. In many ways, it is a very formulaic Mesopotamian text in its composition. In others, it is in line with Achaemenid religious policy with its localization, cooptation, and collaboration with local cults. It is also indicative of the human side of a man, as Abrahamic and Zoroastrian texts have exalted it to no end. But this is perhaps the most important lesson of the Cyrus Cylinder, that Cyrus's statesmanship converged all these traditions. Cyrus used the formulas of Hammurabi and evoked Marduk, while entrenching the power of Persia using his astute political skills. These traditions, the Mesopotamian and the Iranian, merged to produce an innovative and pragmatic universal empire that included all who acquiesced to his vision. Both a pragmatist and a visionary, Cyrus built a powerful empire whose ideals are shown in the Cylinder's prayer. May all the gods whom I settled in their sacred centers ask daily of Bel and Enbu, that my days be long, and may they intercede for my welfare. May they say to Marduk, my lord, as for Cyrus, the king who reveres you, and Cambyses, his son. More videos on the ancient world and its mysteries are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 2,000 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos. Learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.